Good day, and welcome to the very first episode of Patently Strategic, where we discuss all things at the intersection of business, technology, and patents. This podcast is a monthly discussion amongst experts in the field of patenting. It is for inventors, founders, and IP professionals alike. Today, we have an exceptionally great group to kick things off. If my math is correct, there are at least 4 PhDs and 56 years combined patenting experience represented here. That's a whole lot of college debt and a ton of insight packed into the next hour. In this inaugural episode, Ashley Sloat, President and Director of Patent Strategy here at Aurora, leads a deep dive into the on-sale bar and the trapdoor-esque implications of selling your innovation before filing. I assure you, future self will thank you for listening. And this will be a recurring theme as we progress through this series. But before we get into the heavy stuff, we also like to start with some lightweight but relevant topics. Today, the group chats about perspective-shaping professional development books, takes an interesting trip down the patent prosecution highway into some fun and potentially controversial strategy tidbits, and then gets really interrupted by Hawaiian jungle fowl. Ashley is joined today by David Jackrel, President of Jackrel Consulting, David Cohen, Principal at Cohen Sciences, Katrin Kareht, Senior Director of Intellectual Property at Perfect Day. Katrin, please forgive me if I didn't completely nail that. And Daniel Wright, Partnership Manager and Patent Strategist here at Aurora. All right, take it away, Ashley.
David Cohen already said he doesn't have any professional books in mind, but does anybody else have any professional books in mind that they'd like to share? One that kind of revolutionized the way you think about things, or one of the ones that was one of your more favorite ones?
I could start. I'm kind of in the same boat as David. I'm not a big reader of management books, and I actually would love to hear other people's recommendations if there's any that are like IP specific. The management books that I read was more when I was kind of in the startup engineering, manufacturing world. Mm-hmm. And so there are two that I could recommend, although it may not be relevant for people, maybe more for our clients. But Good to Great is a very famous one, but it's really good. So the same author wrote Built to Last, and then Good to Great is really cool. It's about culture. Corporate culture in a nutshell. So I had a CEO who was really into culture and had everyone on our team read Good to Great. And it was kind of like know your DNA as a company. One of the examples that really stuck out to me is Philip Morris. So Philip Morris, if you work for Philip Morris, you get your bonuses in cartons of cigarettes. Like this, maybe not anymore. This is like maybe in the 80s or 90s or something. But that was the culture of that company. They were like, They loved it. If you didn't love tobacco and love their products, like don't work here, you know. And like Sony, is obviously a behemoth, whatever. But one of the things Sony did was way different from a lot of other people culture-wise. They've always thought about 100-year plan. They're like, where's Sony going to be in 100 years? And they've a really interesting kind of like perspective. Again, this could be all different now. This is like 10 plus years ago. But stuff like that. So just culture, what is it? And all that stuff. And then that was kind of the main one. I'll just give a plug for if anyone who's in manufacturing, because I feel like if you're new to it, there's a really great book that's a really easy read. And it's a very story called The Goal. And it's a management-oriented novel about a fictitious manager who's running a company, a manufacturing plant, and trying to save it. But it's like very, very famous. It's like a seminal book on manufacturing and operations management and Kanban and just like all that manufacturing operational flows.
Dan, did you have any you wanted to share?
Yeah, I don't believe I've ever read a biz dev management book. Closest thing I could recommend would be John Coggs, that's with 2 A's, Hiking with Nietzsche. So I studied philosophy in addition to chemistry in college. And so, with my fairly Nietzschean kind of response towards freedom, I actually found that book was a nice introduction to get started, really looking into kind of what Nietzsche's call towards what is our relationship towards the world. How are we to respond and interact with what is given? And I found those lessons quite powerful and relevant. And so I don't know how much this is going to be helpful for improving your manufacturing processes, but it's a good book. It's an easy read, and it's a great introduction into Nietzsche's works, which I found have been quite personally valuable and enlightening.
Very cool.
Nice, yeah.
Awesome. The one I was going to share that I thought was just kind of central to even just human interaction, but also business interaction, was Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And the reason I like what, I think it's so hard to have tough conversations with people.
Right.
And so this one really goes towards the core of that. Kim Scott has kind of been in a lot of the big giants in the tech field, but also done a lot of the startup world, and kind of found that there's this delicate way that you need to approach interacting with people. And it's, kind of a personal involvement, like personal understanding and personal interest in people, but then also being not afraid to, basically give them really crucial feedback that may be hard to hear, but in a non-attacking way. And the way you get that is by understanding them personally and by taking an interest in them personally, and then using, going after more of like their attributes and their behavior and less, about personal attacks. And it seems like really kind of like a duh thing, but there's a lot of good tidbits in there about how just to balance those worlds, and kind of the what happens when you are too nice or you're too critical, right? It kind of can go either way, or when both ways you're just too weak on them, and what can happen in her personal experiences. So I thought it was a really good book. I think they have a whole company around Radical Candor. I think she has some other books now too, but anyways, that was kind of one of my more favorite ones I could kind of identify with. All right, so then
let me just tell you something. So I just hopped on Google and I typed in, I was going to look for Radical Candor. So I typed in radical, and the number one thing that came up was Radical Candor.
Oh, see, they must have done good marketing.
Yeah, someone's working that. So the thing on candor is that this involves power, right? The distribution of power. As a consultant, I have certain critiques, right? But as a consultant, it's your position is different. You really, maybe you can, but in general, there's sort of a barrier there to weigh in and try to tell someone that they're messing up, right? Or especially if they're an officer. Like if you think one of the problems of the company is that the chief scientific officer isn't really providing scientific leadership, directing people. What am I going to say about that?
Right. Yeah, it definitely goes towards a relationship, and also the culture, kind of getting to David Jackrel's point. It's a little bit about the culture that's built too, right? You have to have a culture of feedback, and that may be different from a consultant viewpoint versus a person who's in-house.
Right. And of course, not going in, not being in person, everything through Zoom adds another level of complication.
Well, anyway. Like messaging and stuff like that complicates it too, because tone and body language are left out.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks, Ashley. That does sound like an interesting book.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah.
So does anybody have, I added this one because I thought the other fun thing for us to talk about is any fun strategy tidbits that somebody learned, because I think there's just so many nooks and crannies of patent law. So I figured there might be some fun things to share, or any issues that are arising.
I could share one thing that's pretty interesting. I heard some pretty well-known patent people kind of recommend this, and I brought it up in a different patent group that I'm part of, and there were various opinions, so I think it's kind of an interesting one. And it actually, let me preface this by saying you could probably talk about this for a while, so we might want to just set it up and then couch it or something. Actually, I'll let you manage that. But the idea is that since the track one fees are so expensive, and the PCT filing fees are also expensive, but there's been some changes. I forget one of them. I think the PCT filing fee just recently went down. Is that right? Or track one
I
went
thought they
up?
all went up. I think they all
Maybe
went up.
track
Didn't they?
one went up. Maybe that was it. But the point was that if a client wants to go track one, but they're also thinking that international protection is something that they're interested in, then if you file a PCT with certain receiving offices, and now the US is one of those receiving offices, they end up getting a preliminary search and opinion of patentability very quickly, like within a year, generally within 8 months. And so now if you have a positive ISR, you can then do the PPH, you do the patent prosecution highway in the US, which fast tracks the application. And so the time, it's probably a little bit slower than track one, maybe on the order of 6 months or something like that, if you get a positive ISR. But the fees end up being about the same. And the benefit is then you have a PCT, you have international protection. Whereas if you just go with the track one, you're guaranteed, examination very quickly, a disposition one way or the other within a year. But it's expensive and you don't get the international protection. So there's kind of pros and cons to both approaches. And kind of my takeaway was that if clients are talking about speed and they're talking about track one, just bring up the idea of a PCT. And the biggest risk is if you don't get a positive ISR, you're kind of back to square one, and then you don't have the PPH option anymore. But you could still file in the US with a track one at that point, and you've lost, half a year or a year. So it's risk. There are risks, but anyway, thought that was a interesting new thing I had heard of recently.
So could you only do the PPH from the PCT if you, like, the ISR had found one or more claims novel and non-obvious? Is that the only way that would make sense? Gotcha.
Exactly. And they put business applicability, which is almost always. But yes, exactly. Yeah. Yep. If at least one claim has positive, all positive patentability. Yes, what you said. Then you can do the PPH, and the only kind of like hurdle or additional thing is then the claim in the US really does need to have all the limitations. Doesn't need to be word for word, but it needs to be coextensive, exactly the same as the one in the international, in the PCT. So
interesting. Yeah, I haven't done much of it because I know we had looked into the PPH for Europe before, but our foreign associate had heavily advised against it. I can't remember if it was for cost and for other kind of procedural reasons. And so I do know that, this would be a doubling up of costs and not exactly what you would want, but we have had clients that have done expedited and then they end up getting an issuance kind of right around the time of filing their PCT or right at the beginning. So then it makes prosecution really, really easy off of the PCT just because you kind of have that. And then you'll have to do like another continuation right away because you have the PCT, but that's interesting. Yeah, I would love, honestly, like if you were up for it or somebody, I would love to for us to do more about the PPH because it's kind of one of those things that I feel like not a lot of people do for various reasons. I know that we personally have not done it. Like, so we've looked into it for various countries, but then for various reasons kind of were encouraged not to do it. And I'd have to look up, I'd have to remember which client was and why they said. I know which foreign associate told me about it. So I know I could look up his email maybe and find it, but I'd be curious.
I have heard that about Europe specifically, that EP examiners don't really follow the treaty as well as they're supposed to, I guess, and sort of, take the other partner patent office's examination, put a lot of weight to it, We have had very good results filing PPHs for US applications based on positive ISRs. So that I've done maybe a dozen times even or more. We do that as a standard. If you have a PCT, and if you have a positive ISR and a US app pending, you have to do it before the first substantive examination, I'm pretty sure. But we do that all the time. And I haven't, this is information from another attorney that I work for, but we recommend or we inform our clients that on a positive, on a PPH based on a positive ISR in the US, you have a 90% chance of issued patent within a year.
Wow, that's huge.
For these cases, I presume you're using the U.S. as the searching authority?
No, we usually use Korea.
Korea, okay.
But I think
Is
that
that a
does
cost
matter.
perspective, or is that
That was a cost thing. I think it's Korea. That's what I have in my mind. I can double check. I think, but I think that does matter.
Yeah, it will, because I'll say in my previous role, we did a fair amount with PPH, and it's a bit hit or miss because it's not just Europe that may or may not respect the PPH. It's certainly the process kind of kicks things up in the queue a bit if you file a PPH request and it gets accepted. However, I have found that pretty much every major player patent office, so US, Europe, China, Japan to some extent, if you file a PPH and the claims don't look like their normal practice, they're still going to make it look like their claim. So if you get an issuance in the US and you go to China with a PPH request, technically the US and China participate in the PPH, and theoretically you're supposed to be able to say, hey, China, look, I've got these issued claims in the US, please give me this claims. They're not going to give you those claims. They're gonna again, it'll get bumped up in the queue because now they've got an official PPH request, but they'll look at it and say, that's nice, but please be way more specific, as we normally do, for China. So the PPH I have found to be valuable in some of the smaller jurisdictions that are a bit less, let's say, rigorous with their own prosecution. So places like Mexico, I found it to be helpful off Europe or US. Australia has been helpful off Europe, occasionally US. New Zealand, similarly. And those can be valuable jurisdictions to have a patent in, but they tend, they're not, those offices aren't so much defining policy as much as US, Europe, and China are. So that's kind of my take on PPH.
So, I was going to mention another thing. There's always, the internal debate about whether to have your independent claim be broad or narrow, right? Or between. And so if you consider, if you are looking to get, if you want a clean review from the PCT, then you're better off filing a more narrow claim, right? It's just right. Something that sort of enters into the the conversation.
That's a good point. A lot of times I feel like when people are whenever someone talks about speed and track one, we recommend going a little bit more narrow, making these claims make them high probability of allowance. You're spending all this money to get it examined quickly, yeah. But Dan, that's I haven't done a lot of this international stuff, with these PPHs. So that's a great point. Mostly what we're doing is drafting the claims, filing it, a provisional or not, non-provisional in the US, filing it as a PCT, and then getting a positive search. And I did look it up, and we do typically use Korea. I think that is for cost, but also quality, maybe that the US trusts them, I guess, or that search. But we've had really good luck with what we've done. But I thank you for your perspective. I could totally see how going between different countries could be problematic. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the search thing. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to reiterate. Yeah, it depends. If you're playing with similar offices, then it works well. But in other places, it doesn't. It maybe speed things up by a few months, but you're still going to have to go through the office actions.
I think the other kind of interesting thing you kind of brought up though too is the whole ISA shopping, right? Because I think we kind of get used to just doing, like I said, the US ISA when you file in the US receiving office, but there is some, financial advantage to, shopping around a little bit and seeing which ISA might be a little bit more amenable. And, arguably some of them do a better job searching than others. I would say the US does a decent job, but, in my experience, it seems like, Europe, Japan tend to find even a little bit better art sometimes. So it's interesting. But Cool. Thanks for sharing. But yeah, I mean, if like I said, if anybody wants to do a presentation on that, I would love to kind of, and because I honestly will probably be doing my own download on that actually after this now, after it kind of being brought up to the top of my mind now. Anybody else have any fun tidbits or problems or anything of the nature?
Can I ask a question about the speed discussion we just had? I mean, is there an argument to be made for actually going slow internationally? So I'm as I'm observing some of our cases just go really slowly through the machinery abroad, we are accumulating allowed claims here in the United States. And by going slow internationally, I'm wondering whether at some point I can just bundle I can make an amendment internationally where I bundle so basically, I go broad, really, really broad internationally. So that really gums things up, goes slow. And then, I'm observing what kind of claims we're getting in the United States. And I wonder whether at some point I can, in that international application, just basically draft a claim that encompasses all those claim sets that we are getting allowed in the United States, and then basically just have one case internationally that then can rely on the allowed claims in the United States for, since they do look at the United States Patent Office as to what's happening there, and basically prosecute everything that I've got through in the United States with that one international application.
We've had mixed results on that, kind of alluding to Dan's point about different countries having different claim structures or different disclosure requirements. We have some clients that have sizable portfolios where it's pretty clear what the technical advantage is, but yet, prosecuting the exact same claim set in, let's say, Europe, US, and Japan. For example, we were able to get one allowed in Japan, the US, but Europe wanted even more experimental data that they just didn't have because it was kind of like an ancillary product that they weren't super pursuing. So, and same with China, like we were able to get, certain claim sets through in other countries, but for whatever reason, China was just unconvinced. So I think it kind of depends on the degree to which the technology really stands above the prior art, or whether there is some close competing art. It's kind of that human element, right? And one human in China versus a human in Europe versus a human in the US, they're going to take a different look at it. So I think in general, I think that's a safe bet. And I think that slow process is an advantage. But I think in some cases where it's a little bit tighter, the art's a little bit tighter, it can, there's not as much of an advantage.
Yeah, I agree. Europe is definitely standing out. They will have very different requirements for patentability.
Yeah, they're tough. They're tough cookies, that's for sure. Although I will say there was this, and I can share with anybody, you would have to use my email address. We would do some work with Jay Kemp, and they just did this fantastic webinar on priority chain between like a US provisional and a PCT and the European Patent Office, and how it's all the CRISPR stuff, basically, right? How that priority chain can be broken and what it means. And like, I was probably one of the better webinars that I've heard in a really long time of just, really clear and concise and really well done. So if anybody wants a link to that, let me know and I can share mine. So you might have to use my email address to get into it, but honestly, frankly, don't care. So just let me know. But speaking of Europe.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I'll email you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Did I just hear a rooster?
It's morning somewhere.
I was gonna say,
it's outside. I don't have a rooster, but they run around wild here. So
a little strange. That's good. I like it.
That brought me back. That reminded me of the Oculus.
That's awesome.
I'm on Maui right now, and they just run around everywhere. These roosters, I don't know where how they survive.
I'm so jealous. I wish you would have shared that.
The story is there was a hurricane in the 80s, and before the hurricane, weren't very many, but the hurricane blew over bunches of these chicken coops and roosters and stuff, and now they're just everywhere. Jungle fowl.
Oh, okay.
I love it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'm wondering about. Obviously, everything somehow had to arrive here from somewhere, right? Because being an island, I mean, they have to come by ship. I don't know, right? I mean, there's certain animals that there's many of, and there's others that are very few. I never see snakes. There's very few snakes, but there's all these wild pigs, right? I mean, I need to read up where the wild pigs came from, right?
Right. I think some of those were, I want to say, like brought over on ships like way back when some of the first colonizers, not indigenous, right? But some of the first colonizers came to the area. But yeah, the snake thing is interesting. So I think you're right, because they were, molten, volcanic islands. I think somebody would have had to bring a snake over essentially for them to propagate, which is another positive about Hawaii. Oh,
yeah,
jealous.
Exactly.
All right. No, that's all awesome. Thanks for sharing, everybody. That was very enlightening. I love it. So we'll kind of get into the meat here today. What I want to talk about was the on sale bar, because I feel like there's been a little bit of activity in the court systems around the on sale bar and kind of what it means. So as you all probably know, pre-AIA, the America Invents Act, a person, the 102, the on sale provision of 102 basically stated that a person should be entitled to a patent unless the invention was in public use or on sale in this country more than 1 year prior to the date of the application for patent in the US. And then post AIA, around, I think 2013 is when that took effect, March 16th, 2013, I think. A person shall be entitled to a patent unless the claimed invention was on sale or otherwise available to the public. So some of the court cases I'm going to walk through today, some are old, so definitely would have been pre-AIA, but then some of them are post-AIA. And I think the biggest question that people were wondering was whether how much did that change between pre-AIA and after AIA, but then also what does otherwise available to the public mean? And does that, how does that impact secret sales? And so we'll kind of go through some of these. So I tried to find like some various different case law, kind of different tidbits. So this was Pfaff versus Wells Electric. So Pfaff had basically been working on a socket, and Texas Instruments asked him to develop a new device for mounting and removing semiconductor chip carriers. And so in response to Texas Instruments' request, Pfaff had actually developed engineering drawings, specifications, detailed measurements, and then provided it to Texas Instruments, and then later went to file a patent. And so then obviously later on, Wells Electronics started selling a competing socket, and Pfaff brought suit against Wells. And what they found was that although Pfaff actually had not actually reduced the technology to practice that he gave to Texas Instruments, that he sold to Texas Instruments, he had constructively reduced it to practice because he did provide all the detailed drawings, the specifications, the calculations, and all that. And so basically it was ready for patenting, even though it wasn't a full reduction to practice. And obviously it was an offer for sale, commercial offer for sale, because he did sell it to Texas Instruments. And so this two-prong test, I guess, if you will, kind of forms the basis of a lot of the on sale bar. The whole idea that it has to be the subject of a commercial offer for sale and that the invention must be ready for patenting to trigger the bar are kind of two of the underpinnings. So now, if somebody kind of, just said, oh yeah, Texas Instruments, I can develop something for you, and it's going to cost you $5,000, but then didn't have anything to show for it, I'm not sure that you would actually trigger the on sale bar because you didn't actually have anything to patent at that time. Similarly, kind of based on the Meds Co versus Hospira decision in 2016, if Pfaff would have paid Texas Instruments to manufacture the devices, I don't believe that would have triggered the on sale bar from a commercial offer for sale perspective, because it would have just been paying for manufacturing services as opposed to selling them the actual invention. So I think there's some nuances there, but kind of an interesting, interesting two-pronged test, if you will. The next one I wanted to discuss was this Group 1 versus Hallmark Cards back in the Federal Circuit 2001. So again, pre-AIA, basically Group 1 had developed a curling and shredding ribbon machine and had contacted Hallmark and basically said, we can give this to you and we can do some kind of license or a royalty basis agreement. And Hallmark Cards basically, had kind of entertained it a little bit, but then decided to develop their own machine. And so they rejected Group 1's offer, developed their own machine, and then later Group 1 went to sue Hallmark Cards for patent infringement and lost because they had triggered the on sale bar. So even though the offer for sale was rejected, it still triggered the on sale bar. And it was obviously clear that it was ready for patenting because they were able to provide Hallmark a bag of curled and shredded ribbon that was used in their machine. So it was clear that they had again set aside that two-prong, ready for patenting and commercial offer for sale. And so the other kind of interesting thing about this one was that even like an offer for a license or a lease also triggers the on sale bar. So it's not necessarily like an offer for sale, right? Because you're going to maintain control to some degree, but it still is going to trigger the on sale bar. And even like rejected offers can trigger the on sale bar, just like, like I said, Hallmark rejected the offer, but it still triggered the bar. And then, like I said, there's another one too, that Lax versus McKechnie vehicle components was another kind of decision that kind of revolved around this too. Yeah, so kind of interesting stuff. So then this is conflating a little bit experimental use and on sale. So I think you could almost do like a whole nother presentation on experimental use because there's lots of kind of gray areas there. But Polara Engineering versus Campbell Company, and there was kind of a question of whether the on sale bar was triggered versus whether it was deemed experimental use. And some of the underpinnings of the experimental use provision actually dates way back to the 1800s to a court case that was the City of Elizabeth versus American Nicholson Pavement. It was a decision in 1878. And the three criteria of that for experimental use were the inventor must maintain control of the invention, the inventor must not sell the invention, and the inventor must not voluntarily allow others to use the invention. And so this court case kind of relies on those three things to show that Polara actually didn't trigger the on sale bar, but they actually were in a stage of experimental use. So they didn't have a confidentiality agreement, but Polara's own employees installed, maintained, and uninstalled devices that did or did not work to figure out what was working. And a little bit more background. So Polara was a manufacturer of accessible pedestrian signal systems and pedestrian push buttons. So you can imagine that it's really important that they get it right, because if it doesn't work right, obviously that's dangerous for pedestrians. And so to them, it was, they needed to experimentally test this system to make sure it worked as it was supposed to. So its own employees installed these devices in, I think, the city of Fullerton, and maintained the devices, removed them when they didn't work or needed to look at them. And they never explained to anybody how they worked. It wasn't readily apparent how the devices worked when they were installed. And so for all intents and purposes, the Polara actually maintained control of their invention at all times and never explained to anyone how it worked. And even witnesses for Polara had indicated that it wasn't apparent how it would work on its face, that it would have needed to be explained. So almost like a secret, right? But the fact that they maintained control, and it was clear that they needed it, I think the jury said that it was clear that they needed it to prove whether it would work for its intended use, basically made it so that it was deemed to be experimental use and not triggering the on sale bar. And so I think this was kind of a pretty pivotal decision for the experimental use, because those criteria for maintaining control, not voluntarily selling it, not allowing other people to use it, kind of all are some of the meat of experimental use. Like I said, I think you could do a whole presentation on that one alone. So another interesting one, the reason this one has a green star is because it kind of gave me a little bit of a head scratcher for a minute. And so actually Dan and I were talking about it a little bit. So this one was interesting because we have a lot of clients that do SBIR grants and things of that nature. And so in general, we do try to get something on file before they submit that. But usually in those cases, they're still very much in the experimental stage. They're still kind of figuring out what, if anything, is going to come out of, their investigations. And so in here, so more than 1 year before the filing, RCA, which had already developed character generation equipment, submitted a proposal in response to a request for proposal to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, for character generation equipment for use in air traffic control centers. And so the question was, did submission of this proposal in response to the, RFP, did that trigger the on sale bar? And here they actually found that it did. And partly is because if you go back to those kind of that two rule, it's, commercial offer for sale and whether the invention was ready for patenting. And the invention was very clearly ready for patenting because they'd already reduced it to practice. So it was just basically them submitting it to the FAA in hopes that they would pick it up and use it, and then obviously give them reimbursement or pay them for their device. So they satisfied that two-pronged test. Whereas I think where the gray area in this one comes in, but obviously would love to hear anybody else's opinion on this, is I think if it were like an SBIR grant or something, again, you don't really have an invention quite yet. You have some hypotheses, you have some guesses, and you're hoping that the money can be used to like figure out and find an invention. So I think that's kind of the difference between, responding to a proposal like this versus some kind of grant or other kind of proposal, is whether you fully have something or whether you're kind of waiting to have something.
That was my thought too. That makes sense. I think that in this case, you said that the fact was that invention had been reduced to practice prior to this proposal, so that it was they were in possession of it. But I've actually a few of these cases, and this, and as well as that other one, is surprising to me that that applying for a grant is equivalent to an offer of sale. And then the same with licensing, because I had thought, I was actually trying to look for some things, because I had thought I had heard the opposite, but I that case looked pretty solid. I'm wondering if maybe it's changed or something, or if I just had it wrong in my mind about what types of sales trigger these on sale bars.
Well, I do think that's where the gray area is coming. So I do think it's a lot of, to what degree is the invention reduced to practice? Right, because I think anything like, proposal, a license, a royalty thing, some kind of, because there's the Helson one at the end here too, is a little bit, kind of gets into the whole secret sale thing a little bit. So I think it's like, I think all those could be viewed as on sale, but if it weren't ready for patenting, which I think is a little bit, that's kind of where are the meets and bounds of that, right? When is something truly ready for patenting versus, maybe needs a little bit more work. So I think that's where the gray area is, right? Where are you on that scale? And then, somewhere at that scale, it's going to trigger the on sale bar, but, at what point?
Right. And I at the risk of derailing your presentation a little bit, Ashley, sorry. I think that there's some controversy about whether licensing triggers an on sale bar or not. It's just because that somehow just stuck out in my brain. I don't know why. And I was looking at an article that said in the early 2000s, Minton versus NASDAQ, et cetera, Hallmark cards found that a license may be tantamount to a sale. But then there's another case that says the licensing of a patent does not trigger the on sale bar. This is Collar. Wait, which case is that? Federal Circuit in Collar. Yeah.
Is that the licensing of the patent though, or the technology?
Oh, that's a good question. Licensing of a patent.
Right.
So were you talking
like
about licensing of the technology?
Right. Because, it's like, because in theory, because I think there's a different case later on, I can't remember if I discussed it here or not, where it's like a future promise to grant a license under a patent doesn't trigger the on sale bar, because you're not technically selling the invention. You're like licensing or granting rights to a future patent or something.
Thank you. Got that. I did not appreciate that distinction. Okay, I see that now.
It's crazy muddy.
Exactly that. Yeah. Okay.
It was going through this. I didn't think there was going to be as much nuance as there was, because even, there was another case, I can't remember if I describe it here or not, where like selling just, if you technically sell technical insight to, like an invention or a process, that doesn't trigger the on sale bar, because it requires the receiving party to still reduce it to practice and figure it out. So you could sell like technical knowledge about something, and that doesn't trigger the on sale bar. So it's just, it's one of those things where like you have to be super careful, because I think it's really easy to step in something without really knowing that you're stepping in something.
Yeah.
So, but no, thank you for that point though. That's and feel free to share those other, I'd like to look at those other cases that you found too. I'm curious.
I can send around this article. Sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and so another one that was interesting was whether you are, so this is Quest Integrity versus Coke Busters from 2019. So Quest had developed a method for kind of collecting and displaying inspection data for furnaces. And so prior to the critical patenting date, they had not sold the device or sold the method, but they performed the method for clients and then gave them the final report. So like, think of like going to some commercial building and basically doing a furnace inspection and then giving the client these formal reports. That's what they did. And it was found that because the later filed patent covered the display method, because they had kind of a unique way of displaying it, and it covered the process through which the furnace data was collected, that they're performing the service and providing those reports did trigger the on sale bar. So even though they never sold the physical product or even any software, the fact that they provided the reports triggered the on sale bar. So I think that's really interesting from like a software client perspective, because, it's like, well, we just on our website, we give clients, this output about, their health or something, and we don't ever sell them the actual software, or like some wearable or something, but really it could still trigger the on sale bar, especially if it tracks to some later claims that they're protecting. So I think that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice reminder to some extent that when you patent a method or trying to patent a method, you are indeed patenting a method. However tied. Well, when you're patenting a method, you're indeed patenting a method. Sort of regardless of how, depends exactly on the claim, how it's tied to a machine. So here they never sold any machine. They never handed out any specific physical or otherwise item. But what they were after was a method, and they were commercially benefiting from the performance of that method. And so it's subject just as much to the on sale bar, although it looks like that you're keeping the invention to yourself, you're keeping, the secrets in. But no, you are commercially utilizing the method that you are now seeking to patent. And the method, it is a method. It is not necessarily tied to a specific machine unless the claim does that. So surprising, but makes total sense for this case.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask just as a practical matter? I mean, I think a lot. Various startups that I've worked at various stages of commercialization have faced this problem where they're like, well, a manufacturing process, for instance, is being used to create a product, but it's 100% invisible. It is not reverse engineerable at all, right? So technically, the product is using that method, just like Dan said, and it triggers the on sale bar. And I mean, in practice, do companies follow those rules? And like, how do you advise clients in those situations?
Well, I mean, to trigger the on sale bar, I think so if you're keeping the manufacturing method trade secreted, so it's not going to be found in a later patent in the claims, then that wouldn't trigger the on sale bar, because whatever's triggering the on sale bar would have to be tied to the claims. I think that's actually in this next case. The subject matter that was on sale has to, tie to a patent claim.
Yeah.
But the whole like getting data, getting information, I think that line is hard, especially from the software world, because it pretty much has to be, and maybe I'm not getting to maybe I didn't understand your question right here, but
yeah. I mean, like,
another
way to put it is like, let's say a company is using a manufacturing process to make a product. They start selling that product, and then a year, 2 years later, they say, oh, we want to patent this process, but we've been using it to make product for 2 years. So technically the on sale bar prevents them from getting that product. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I guess the answer is the risk to the company is that if they ignored that, then they could get a patent, because the patent office isn't going to know that they've been using it in a product. But down the road, if they ever try to enforce that patent and it ever goes to discovery, the patent could be invalidated because it technically did break that rule. Is that kind of like
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's my understanding. Right. I mean, I think there is some like, public facing part of it, but yeah, selling the product that was built by this manufacturing process. I think, it's better to file multiple provisionals that you can allow to disappear into the ether should you decide not to convert them, than to, later be like, oh shit, I wish we would have done something. But it's tough because, it's easy to say, well, that's not that valuable right now, but then change your mind later.
Oh, and budget and everything, like I've been at a few different companies in the IP side where product is about to be sold and there's a big review. Okay. There's hundreds and hundreds of processes going into making this product, which are covered, which aren't, what do we want to patent now? And there's always, constraints, right? And then down the road, people change their mind, for various reasons. So it's a tricky one. I think a lot of companies face this, and I was just curious to see how you all, advise companies in those situations,
Yeah, luckily, I feel like I'm trying to think of a case where, I think our biggest issue has been software people where they just, I didn't, nobody knows how it works. Nobody knows how it does. It's like, yeah, but it's still a problem. The fact that you had it out there, the fact that you were doing things with it, that it was available is still a problem, and so it's, a lot of companies trying to reconcile this. Well, nobody knows how to do what we're doing from a software perspective. So does it really matter that it was, out there? And it's like, well, I see your point, but
and all of us, we shouldn't forget, all of us as patent agents have the ethical requirements to disclose what we know to the patent office.
Right,
so if we
exactly.
know it's been used to make a product, we technically have to disclose that, right? So then it actually wouldn't get through the patent office.
Yeah, you'd have to find, the I don't know, I suppose the websites and stuff from the selling aspect of it, and
right.
Has anyone ever had to submit from an IDS perspective? Has anyone ever had to submit a purchase order or anything? Has anybody ever had to do that? You know what I mean? Because I'm presumably we haven't had that issue before, but if somebody had been selling it, have you had to submit a purchase order in an IDS before? You know what I mean?
To prove that it wasn't sold? No.
Well,
would that prove that it was? Yeah.
Well, that duty to disclose, right? If your client says to you, well, look, this was on sale 6 months before we filed,
right.
Here's the purchase order, or because it's seen in the grace period, it doesn't, it matters, but doesn't matter as much.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So interesting. So many confines.
And related, I'm sorry, I lost connectivity briefly, but maybe you talked about this, but the but the scenario, you have a method that you decided to keep as a trade secret, right? And you're producing your product for a while, and now somebody else comes along and patents your method, right?
Right.
You do have, since you have been using it, right? You are right. Is there not? Is there? There's this notion that you're protected from any subsequent. Is that in that scenario? Is that a publication? Right? Is your method out there? Can somebody else get a patent on your method?
So my understanding,
first to file, but it's first to file, so they're filing first. But you have had it in use, and you've had your product, even though your method was not obvious, on the market.
Yeah, my understanding of that is that if anybody, independently comes up with your same process, they can use it and patent it in theory. But obviously, you've been using it before, so presumably the patent would be held invalid. But then they also couldn't get you for infringement because you could show, predating, right? That you could show that you had been using it well before their patent ever was filed.
I admit I'm not an expert on this, but that was my understanding also, that if you kept it as a trade secret and it was never published anywhere, that is a risk. Anybody can patent it and get a valid patent on that. But you have some protections. This is where I'm not totally clear. I see Dan unmuted. Maybe he knows more about it. But you have some protection if you've been using it against being sued. But I don't know exactly what that is.
Yeah, I perhaps betrayed a greater confidence in this answer than I actually have. But I would suspect that you'd end up in a situation where it's probably going to be a long, painful court case. But I would think that in the end, nobody gets a patent.
And nobody's infringing, probably.
Yeah, nobody gets a patent, so therefore nobody's infringing. But that's probably going to be a protracted case. But yeah, trade secrets are wonky, and I am by no means an expert.
And I think so. Maybe a little bit of additional, advice that I've gotten is the problem also with that is like you might not be found to be infringing, and the patent may be found to be invalid since it was in use. Although there could very well be, a follow-up patent. There could very well be some dependent claims, some details in there that as you improve your method, you may be precluded from getting into, right?
Yeah.
So your right to use is limited to exactly the way you were doing it, right? So if they have any alterations, any improvements that you then also want to implement, you just cannot go there anymore.
No, that's very fair. And that's a great strategy too, from like, we were actually just talking about this in a client meeting the other day about if you want to kind of get a leg up on your competitors, taking their products, having your engineering team look at them and devise ways that they would improve them and file on those to kind of put stops on your competitor from improving their own products and kind of, getting some arsenal in case they ever wanted to come after you. You also have some things in your back pocket too.
Right.
That's true. That would be a mean trick, but I'm sure it's happened.
So is your, my advice generally is to also file in methods. Is that what practice do you guys, or what strategy you propose to your clients?
To do methods and devices?
Yeah, I always generally try to find a method, slip it in there. So, sometimes the methods end up being kind of weak, but if you've got the space in the claim set for them and the client's willing to pay, it's certainly just having options, having a different perspective on the same thing can be valuable, because you can't always predict what the future has in store for development of the tech, how your competitors are going to phrase things. So generally, I've historically always tried to find methods relevant to the device, regardless of what the device is.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I started thinking about a lot more on that note is who's infringing, And so in some cases you might have a system and you might have a method, and then an apparatus, someone's manufacturing the apparatus, but different people are using it. So the method is actually going after different infringers. And in some cases, those infringers might be customers in their living room, and that's probably not a valuable claim. But if you're, a service, or rather, if you're selling a lot of equipment to companies, so Applied Materials, who sells processing equipment to Intel, the method of using that piece of equipment is going to be infringed by Intel, but the equipment itself would be infringed by Applied Materials. So. Started to think about that a lot more, because I'm doing a lot of analyst work now, analyzing claims for buying and selling and claim charts and stuff, and it's all about who's infringing. Yeah.
Good point.
Awesome. Great discussion. I'm going to jump ahead here into, I think we kind of talked about this one. Yeah, it's just, for this one, we kind of already talked about this one, the fact that the subject matter for that on sale bar must meet a claim limitation, even inherently. In this case, with this Scaltech versus Retech or Tetra 2001, it inherently satisfied certain limitations. So that's required. So, and then the long-awaited one, which I think was the biggest unknown for pre-AIA to AIA, was just the secret sale, because or otherwise available to the public provision of AIA seemed like maybe secret sales were okay, and that's I think what everybody was hoping. But what they found in Helsinn versus Teva Pharmaceuticals was that Helsinn had executed a license. So Helsinn was basically a drug company. They had executed a license and a supply and purchase agreement with MGA Pharma, and this agreement required confidentiality, but was also publicly announced. The agreement had 2 different dosages in it, and then later Helsinn filed the patent 2 years later, covering the 2 different dosages in that agreement. And it was found that the agreement with MGI Pharma, although it required confidentiality, still did trigger the on sale bar. It did have the 2 dosages in it, and even though those dosages were not made public, the agreement was made public and it was offered for sale, and it was clearly ready for patenting because they had executed this agreement with them. And so that's one of those things where now, basically in this case, the other interesting statement that was made by the court was that outside of the in this country provision of pre-AIA 102, AIA did not change the on sale bar. That any of the case law that predated AIA and now is, after AIA, the on sale bar did not change outside of the in this country provision. So I think, I would wager that statement in this decision is going to be echoed in many, many other decisions about the on sale bar that basically said, look, we've already ruled on the on sale bar pre-AIA. And as the Supreme Court said, nothing really changed except in this country provision. And so all the other things that we've already said still apply, including secret sale issues and different things like that. And so I think this case was pivotal for multiple reasons, not only the secret sales, but also the fact that they kind of said, we've kind of been there, done that with all of this, and it hasn't really changed. So the last 2 things I have, I love this quote, and this came from, the FAFT decision, but it was actually quoting another decision, the Metallizing Engineering versus Kenyon Bearing Auto Parts. And I think this kind of just clearly shows the point of the patent system. The quote says, "It is a condition upon an inventor's right to a patent that he shall not exploit his discovery competitively after it is ready for patenting. He must content himself with either secrecy or legal monopoly." And it's this whole idea is that, make your decision and stick with it, because you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You can't do both. So determine which one you want to do and stick with it, because there's not a lot of options to go back.
It's very Zen.
Yeah, right. I just spoke to me, so you can see my green heart. So anyways, here's kind of my conclusions from it. Is that, advertising a product that's not yet developed, right, hasn't been reduced to practice, or pre-announcing a product, like if you were to pre-announce on, maybe even a kind of one of those crowdsourced funding things, if you haven't actually made the product yet, you're probably not going to trigger the on sale bar because it wasn't ready for patenting. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, just transferring technical knowledge about a process does not necessarily trigger the on sale bar. A manufacturing agreement to kind of just, provide you with a product does not necessarily trigger the on sale bar. And then, if the inventor can maintain control and, argue experimental use, that might also not trigger the on sale bar. But, licensing agreements, performances of services that are patent protected can, providing detailed technical drawings to a potential licensee can, even unaccepted or canceled orders can trigger the on sale bar. And then secret sales can also trigger the on sale bar. So definitely not black and white, but very interesting kind of body of case law, I would say. So that is
Ashley, what provoked you to take this on? I mean, was this something that was this an issue that you came across yourself, or was it just you being curious as you are and pursuing it?
That's kind of multifold. I mean, I think it's one of those things that comes up all the time, with clients is like, well, I did this, or I'm thinking about doing this, to what degree is this going to be problematic? But then we've been trying to, since Josh joined the team, we've been trying to be more tech focused, SEO focused, all that kind of stuff. So it's also, trying to find interesting things to blog about and whatnot. So it's also kind of, finding, kind of double dipping, right? If I'm going to, look into this because I'm personally interested, then I might as well do, work with you guys on it because I'm always interested about your opinions, and I might as well do some kind of blog on it. You know what I mean? It's just kind of this, across the board double dipping as well. So, but a lot of things, it's hard for me to devote time to something these days unless I'm like personally interested. So I try to find things that, kind of get my curiosity going, and it causes me to want to dig in.
So in terms of practical advice, I mean, there's a lot of lessons that you've gone through, but doesn't it seem like, extensive, aggressive filing of provisional patents is sort of, the aspirin for this whole thing, right? I mean, isn't that the easiest way to take care of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the budget's right, I think for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
But
I think filing. I agree with Ashley. Filing many provisionals is the aspirin for most things if the client can afford it.
Uh-huh.
And there's constantly. I always like to propose, rolling divisionals. Theoretically, that's a grand idea. But few clients want to constantly pay for you to keep updating and refiling something.
Right.
So,
do you have? Go ahead, Ashley.
Well, just the other piece I was going to say, I think it's also empowering clients, though, because a lot of clients are very gifted writers, honestly, because they do have to do like technical specifications, and they do have to, they're conversing with their people and manufacturers and stuff like that. And so I think sometimes empowering them too, to say, why, if you have time, of course, we're here if you don't have time, but if you have time, if you want to take a first pass, you're taking a first pass is going to greatly reduce my workload, and it's going to obviously impact your budget positively if that happens. And so I think there's some value there depending on the client and their busyness, their budget, the use case, all that kind of stuff.
So do people, this probably is another topic, but do you have an approach to filing a very slim provisional? I mean, how do you minimize the work of a provisional and yet get credit for the concept, I guess? Maybe that's a topic for another day, but it's just something that I face and I'm curious.
I mean, we've seen it a couple different ways. So we've had some clients that have, a little bit deeper portfolio already. So the way to kind of get concepts on file more quickly is we harvest stuff from other applications that has merit and value, and it's kind of like it's like the underpinning of the new technology. So you can take a lot of that from like a support enablement disclosure perspective, and then you spend like another 4 pages on the actual invention, draft some claims out and file it, and then you have it's enabled, it's supported, there's disclosure, you have claims, but yet it didn't require you to draft a whole new 20-page document. And then other ones we have had is that there was like some, this isn't great, but there was some pre-publication activity, but they did improve upon it. So you take that publication as kind of some of the basis, but then again, draft upon it, right? Of, here's are the improvements. But, for those technologies, for those small companies where it's like completely new, it's completely, it's a slim provisional is hard.
Right.
The other strategy is from, I've as a consultant, particularly at the beginning of my career, I was managed by patent attorneys who took the approach that they would give me, very simply, they would give me a number of hours, and maybe one can do that for oneself, right? To say, okay, I have 8 hours, and whatever I can get into 8 hours is all I'm going to do, right?
Right.
And it was really dissatisfying to me sometimes, but I think from the client's perspective, it made sense. The basic, their attitude was like, most of these things are not going to be worth the paper that it's written on, right? Particularly if you're filing early. So we're just going to limit the budget, right? And we're just going to say, here, go for it, 8 hours, do as much as you can, and that's got to be enough,
right?
Okay. I mean, what about incorporating by reference, right? That would be another way to bulk it up. Do you agree?
Well, but I don't think Europe and other countries like that respect that. So I don't know, from like a priority document perspective, I don't know if that would hold up.
Yeah, that might work out if you're planning to just stay in the U.S. But if this is potentially a big case going maybe worldwide, that's a large gamble if you have substantial material, critical material in a incorporation by reference.
Yeah, it's just not easy. There's often always trade-offs. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is articulating those trade-offs that, like, yes, we can, limit the amount of time, or we can limit the budget, or we can, not include claims, or, if you have figures, we can just use those. But, there's going to be some trade-off. And so if you this ends up being like the pivotal technology to your company, skimping at this stage could cause problems. It's just hard to know what those problems are going to be. So. Awesome.
So-
Well, thanks for participating, everybody, today. I really appreciate it. That was a good, lively discussion on all fronts. Maybe it's like the reinvigorated new year.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Interesting
Ashley.
topic.
That was a good topic. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashley. All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Well, have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, that's all for today, folks. Thanks for listening, and remember to check us out at aurorapatents.com for more great podcasts, blogs, and videos covering all things patent strategy. And if you're an agent or attorney and would like to be part of the discussion, or an inventor with a topic you'd like to hear discussed, email us at podcast@aurorapatents.com. Until next time, keep calm and patent on.
I'll email you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Did I just hear a rooster?
It's morning
Somebody-
somewhere.
I was going to say,
No,
hi.
it's